Hi folks, in this video I'll try to answer the questions: who are the lucky people that get to read Stephen King's first drafts of his novels, and what have been their contributions to the stories we all love? I'll introduce you to the main people that King has relied on throughout his long career to proofread his manuscripts, going all the way back to his student days. King has written beautifully about what he calls his first readers in On Writing. He explains how he usually runs off and sends out about half a dozen copies of a new manuscript, and how he is eager to hear the thoughts of those 6 proofreaders. Writers are needy people, he wrote, especially between the first draft and the second, when the study door swings open and the light of the world shines in. King met 3 people who would become regular first readers during the early part of his career while he was studying English at the University of Maine at Orono between 1966 and 1970. His literature professor Burt Hatlen was one of them. In his sophomore year, King took a class Hatlen taught on modern American literature. King went up to Hatlen one day after class and said, "I've written a novel. Would you be willing to read it?" That novel was The Long Walk. Since then, Burt Hatlen read all the early novels in manuscript form, both the published and the unpublished ones. King later dedicated The Long Walk, that is to say Richard Bachman did, to Hatlen and to 2 other UMO teachers, Jim Bishop and Ted Holmes. It was the last novel Hatlen received a manuscript copy of. Hatlen later said in an interview, "I gave him a detailed critique on it, which he ignored. The giant spider and its persuasiveness was the problem. What was most persuasive about the creature in it was that the monster appeared in the form of your deepest fear. If he could have somehow sustained that all the way to the end." Apart from his qualms with the ending, Hatlen thought very highly of it. King knew this and invited Hatlen over to his house in Bangor to watch the It miniseries on TV in 1990. King called Hatlen the best English teacher he ever had. All through the 80s and 90s, he sent Hatlen a copy of every new novel, with a warm inscription to Burt and his wife Virginia. To see these and 700 other King inscriptions, visit signedanddated.info. During his time at university, King became friends with 2 Susans. King later asked one of the 2, Susan Artz, to become one of his first readers. King had a column in the university newspaper called King's Garbage Truck. He lovingly mentioned Susan twice. Once he thanked her for being someone who is able to make almost anyone believe in Santa Claus, happy endings, Oz, Camelot, and truth and beauty. The other time, his column was a satirical last will and testament, and to Susan Artz he bequeathed his love. King and Susan Artz remained friends. In 1971, King dedicated his novel in manuscript form, titled Getting It On, to her. 6 years later, in 1977, that novel was published, but its title was changed to Rage and its author to Richard Bachman. A year later, she appeared in the foreword of the 1978 version of The Stand, where she is thanked. Susan Artz Manning of Castine, who proofed the original manuscript. A few years later, in 1981, King asked Susan Artz to proofread his first draft of It. In preparation for his second draft rewrite, knowing that the novel had so many dates and names of characters and places in it, King asked Susan for each chapter to write out a summary and a list of names, places, and dates, which she did wonderfully. In his senior year at university, in the summer of '69, King met the woman he would later call his ideal reader, his future wife, Tabitha Spruce. They got married on January 2nd, 1971. Since then, Tabitha is probably the only person who has read every story King has written before it was published. "I think that every novelist has a single ideal reader," King wrote in On Writing. "That at various points during the composition of a story, the writer is thinking, I wonder what he/she will think when he/she reads this part. For me, that first reader is my wife, Tabitha. She is my best and most trenchant critic. When she feels the work is good, she says so. When she feels I've put my foot in it, she sets me on my ass as kindly and lovingly as possible." In a sense, you could say that Tabitha's influence is on every page of a King book, and this is most certainly the case in the first of King's published novels, Carrie. "My wife really pulled that story out of me. She was the one who told me about the Tampax dispensers being on the wall in girls' locker rooms, and that the girls in the one scene ought to wear shower caps," King said in 1982. When King graduated from university in 1970, he took a job at New Franklin Laundry in Bangor. After a year of that, he quit and happily accepted a contract to teach English at Hampden Academy, starting in the fall of 1971. At the time, he was a freelance writer who plays the guitar, enjoys mechanics, and is a self-professed jigsaw puzzle freak. A colleague at the English department there was George Everett McCutcheon, Mac to his friend. Mac McCutcheon became an important proofreader for the novels of the 70s and 80s. He read everything from Salem's Lot to the Tommyknockers. He died shortly before that novel came out. McCutcheon had a keen eye for spotting factuals and continuity errors, and his specialty was guns and ballistics. This was especially helpful when King wrote Cycle of the Werewolf and It, with the ballistics involved in turning Marty Coslaw's silver spoon into silver bullets in Cycle and Ben Hanscom's silver dollars into silver slugs in It. King thanked McCutcheon by putting him in both books. In Cycle, Marty's Uncle Al asks a friend from Hampton, Mac McCutcheon, to melt the spoon down into bullets, and in the fourth Derry interlude in It, Claude Heroux buries his woodsman's axe in the head of a character named Tinker McCutcheon. Tinker was a big man with a black beard going grey, King added as a description, which fits the man quite nicely. In fact, 3 of the 4 men cut down by Claude Heroux in The Sleepy Silver Dollar, Tinker McCutcheon, Floyd Calderwood, and David Stugley Grenier, are all based on King's colleagues at Hampton Academy, and the 4th, Eddie King, was based on himself. In 1975, King moved to Bridgeton, Maine, and lived there till 1977. At the local doctor's practice, the Bridgeton Family Medical Center, he met Russ Dorr, a physician's assistant. On the paperwork, Dorr noticed that King had filled in writer on the occupation line and asked about it. They became friends, spending many evenings on Dorr's porch together. Russ Dorr read everything since the original The Stand in manuscript form. He helped with the medical stuff in Firestarter, Misery, Pet Sematary, and Cujo, among many others. In Cujo, for instance, a character dies of heat stroke, but details in the draft were wrong. A person's skin would become dry, not sweaty, Dorr pointed out. In Gerald's game, King needed to figure out how a woman might get out of handcuffs, and Dorr arrived at the idea that if the cuffs were slightly too big, of using her own blood as a lubricant to slide one hand free. Dorr also explained in detail the physics of the injury that Edgar Fremantle sustained in Doomakey. In the late summer of 2007, King asked Dorr if he would take on the role of research assistant. In that capacity, Dorr did his most notable work on Under the Dome and 11/22/63. 2 of Dorr's contributions to the Bill Hodges trilogy were suggesting the title Finders Keepers and researching and explaining to King how computer programs are written for End of Watch. As with Mac McCutcheon, King has left traces of Russ Dorr's name in some of the character names of doctors in his novels. In Under the Dome, King borrowed Dorr's nickname and middle name for one of the characters, Rusty Everett, the local physician's assistant. In The Library Policeman, the main character, Sam Peebles, has a friend named Russ Frame, who's a physician's assistant working in a family practice in Grand Rapids. And for me, Dr. Handor in It, who treats Eddie Kaspbrak's broken arm, seems like it might also be a nod to Russ. Over the years, Russ Dorr became a very good friend. King described him as a Nordic monster of inspiration and good cheer in Dr. Sleep, and said in the Institute that, other than my wife, he was the only one who saw my fiction before it was fully dressed and ready for its close-up. King's sons, Joe Hill and Owen King, both published authors, have also become regular first readers, and have been for the last 10 years at least. Owen got his first acknowledgement as far back as 1998 in Bag of Bones, for which he provided technical support on the subject of Woodstock, New York. He read first drafts of Mr. Mercedes and Finders Keepers, and his feedback helped sharpen the text of that novel, King said. King was more concrete about Owen's contribution to Dr. Sleep. He wrote, "My son Owen read the book and suggested valuable changes. Chief among them was his insistence that we see Dan reach what recovered alcoholics call the bottom." Joe Hill also read Mr. Mercedes and helped to fix some issues with cell phones that Tabitha had pointed out. His contribution to 11/22/63 was more significant. Joe pointed out consequences of time travel that King hadn't considered, and he even thought up a new and better ending. King has recently described Tabitha, Joe, and Owen as his quartet of first readers, and added that he would depend on them to tell him when it was time to stop publishing the stories he gave them to read. In addition to these regular proofreaders, King will often ask other people's opinion on a book because they have a particular expertise, medical, historical, or technical, or because he just happened to be thinking of them. For Christine, King asked some friends at Bangor's radio station WZON to help identify all of the songs and artists behind the lyrics he had quoted in the book. From a Buick 8 is set in Pennsylvania and features a Pennsylvania state trooper, so King asked Lou Southard of the Pennsylvania State Police to read his manuscript. Southard sent back 8 pages of comments and corrections. David Morrell, the author of First Blood, received fair copy drafts of It, Misery, The Dark Half, 4 Past Midnight, and Needful Things. In the letter that accompanied the typescript of It in 1986, King wrote, "If you have anything to say about the book, give me a call, and if you hate it, don't be afraid to say so. I'm a big boy," he said, his lowered lip trembling only the smallest bit. Michael McDowell, author of more than 30 books and screenplays, received a photocopy in the mail of the first draft of Misery. McDowell read it and, as he recalled later, told King over the phone, "The climax needs one more beat. I have no idea what it should be, but you need about 6 more pages of something to slow it down, because now it's over too quickly. Just a beat, that's all." King replied, "I felt that, but I was hoping I was wrong. I wasn't. I'll fix it." And King did fix it. At the beginning of Part 3 of Misery, in subchapter 4, the E key of the old royal typewriter breaks. It is between this point in the story and the moment at the end of subchapter 10 when the Colorado State Police car pulls into Annie Wilkes' driveway that King inserted the beat to slow the story down. King expanded what were just 9 pages in the first draft to 24 pages in the second draft. Thanks to Michael McDowell's suggestion, King added details of how Paul Sheldon recovered from the foot amputation, the ice cream sundae scene, Sheldon's thoughts about radical reader involvement, and the letters he received from Mrs. Roman D. Sandpiper. These mostly meditative passages supplied the necessary extra length. They gave readers the feeling of time passing between the climax of Part 2, when Annie chops off Sheldon's foot, and the beginning of the climax of Part 3, when the state trooper arrives. Okay, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed meeting some of the proofreaders Stephen King has relied on throughout the years. Thank you for watching.